Good morning and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Good morning and welcome to the broadcast. We're going to continue now our reading and discussion of the book The Papacy and the Civil Power by R.W. Thompson. Yesterday we were talking about immigration and the immigration oath and what responsibility particularly Roman Catholic immigrants have in coming to this country, and then find out that they've given their oaths to a government and a constitution that their popes revile. And they find themselves in a situation where the legitimate civil power of this country asks their obedience, giving them rights in return, and the Roman Catholic Church teaching them that this is a heretical government, that it's a government de facto and not a government de jure, and that they have a spiritual mandate to overturn this government and to put in its place a papal government. Not a government of, by, and for the people, but a government of, by, and for the Pope, as being the replacement of the Son of God on earth, the Vicar of Christ. And it says, in order to demonstrate, and by the way, if you're following along, this is page 580 of the book, the first full paragraph down about the first half of the page. It says, but in order to demonstrate the legitimate use of the right of resistance to civil authority, this Jesuit author explains the Catholic doctrines in relation to de facto governments, that is, governments existing by what he calls a consummated act, whether of revolution or otherwise, and in the actual possession of all necessary power. That these doctrines may be comprehended, it is necessary to keep in mind that according to the teachings of Rome, governments de facto are those which have been established by the people upon the overthrow of the kingly authority, which is considered the only legitimate authority. So we must comprehend that under papal dogma, under Roman Catholic canon law, the only legitimate governments in the world are those that are described as kings. Okay? The Pope being King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and that he selects kings to rule over the nations, and they rule at his behest. They too share with him the kingly status. That's the only form of government allowed in the Roman Catholic world by the Pope. And all other governments are illegitimate. The government of the United States, according to the Roman Catholic Church, is a government de facto. It is a government in fact. In other words, it truly exists, but it's illegitimate. It grew out of an overthrow by the people of a legitimate kingly government. Okay, and this makes direct reference to the fact that the Revolutionary War was a popular revolution. It was a revolution of the people of the colonies against the kingly power of England. And that kingly power, though it had been wrested from the Pope in periods throughout its history, the Pope never relinquished his jurisdiction to England. And so the colonies, through England, belonged to the Pope. And the colonists threw off the authority of that legitimate government, that kingly government in England, and set up a republic where the people were the governors. Now this is, as we've said so many times throughout the reading of this book, this is the enemy of the papacy. Our form of government is antithesis to that form of government desired and required by the papacy. So in Roman Catholic terminology, the government of the United States is illegitimate, and it is a de facto government. That's what makes it illegitimate. A popular government. Now, we beat that to death. Let's go on. It says, governments de jure are such as are based upon the law of God, with kings at their head, who shall obey the Pope as the highest authority upon the earth. Okay, that's the government desired by and required by the papacy. A kingly government. A king that is subservient to the Pope, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that he describes as a de jure government. So we have a de facto government, a government in fact, but is illegitimate, and we have a de jure government that follows the papal direction. Now, in this view, all Roman Catholic monarchies are governments de jure, and therefore legitimate, while all popular republics are governments de facto, and therefore illegitimate. So anytime you're listening to Fox News, and particularly Fox News, and they're talking about a foreign nation or a revolution taking place in a government, they'll use the terms de facto and de jure. And now you know where they get these words. They're they're embodied in Roman Catholic canon law. And a de facto government, if a government is described as de facto on Fox News, you can better believe that it was the Pope who decided if it was a de facto government. And likewise, if they use the term to describe the government as de jure, they got that definition from the Pope, in that it is the Pope's choice for the government of that country. Interesting, isn't it? The things you can learn from R.W. Thompson. So now, according to Roman Catholic canon law and tradition, kings must always rule, the people never. Okay? If the people have any say in government, it's not a papal government. A papal government is top-down, hierarchical, kingly. And the king is essentially a dictator. He's just simply following the dictates of the Pope. The people are to be governed. They are not to govern in any Roman Catholic society. So what do Roman Catholic immigrants find when they come to the United States and swear an oath of allegiance to our Constitution and to our popular form of government? They've made themselves a tacit enemy of the papacy. And so when they go to the Roman Catholic Church, what does the priest tell them? Well, you've sworn an oath to an illegal de facto government. And it's an illegitimate government. And its laws, being that they are promulgated by an illegitimate government, are null and void. And their naturalization oath is sanctioned under that illegitimate law. So therefore, it was no oath at all. It was a perjury. And it was a violation of your conscience. And I, as a priest of Rome, can absolve you from that perjury and forgive you your sins, but with the command that, as Roman Catholic, as a subject of the Pope and not of this government, that it is now incumbent upon you to do whatever you can to make this a lawful government. That is, to overthrow the de facto government and replace it with a de jure government. Now, do you see how we have forming within this country a fifth column of citizenry that have their first and foremost allegiance to a hostile foreign enemy, the papacy? It's a very real situation that exists in the United States, but it's hardly recognized by anybody. Now, kings must always rule, the people never. Hence, the old Roman Catholic monarchy of Spain, overthrown a few years ago, was a government de jure. In other words, it was a kingly government, a government sponsored by the papacy. It was a government de jure to which implicit and passive obedience was due. Hence also, the government of the United States is a government de facto, because it was the offspring of revolution and was substituted in the place of a monarchy, the Crown of England. And hence again, the latter is an illegitimate government. That is, the American government, the de facto government of the United States, is an illegitimate government, born with by the papal hierarchy for a while, only from motives of prudence, but subject to resistance and overthrow to make room for a government de jure or a legitimate government whenever the interest in the welfare of the papacy shall require it and the results can be made certain. So you can see from this alone that America has been biding its time since the very founding of this nation. The time will eventually come when Roman Catholicism can grow to a controlling status, and the Pope, with his Jesuits spread throughout the country, keeping close tabs on the condition of the nation and the mindset of the people, and at such time that it seems that an opportunity of success might prevail, that they will give the command to revolt against the government and to overthrow it. But in the meantime, they have to live in this unfortunate state of affairs in America and tolerate the abuses of this government against the Roman Catholic Church and against the authority of the Pope on pain of prudence. It's just not prudent to launch a revolution in a de facto government if the chances are not good that you could succeed. So we have growing within the United States of America a fifth column destined for overturn of the government, morally compelled to overthrow this government, a compulsion that will never be absolved, a divine imperative to take over the government and to replace it with a de jure government. That's a situation that's never going to change in the United States so long as the Roman Catholic Church exists in the United States. So this is something we have to comprehend. All right, and to constantly war against, peacefully, by all means, but to prevent the papacy from ever getting a foothold in the country. Now, it says, it is wonderful how surely all Roman Catholic authors and publicists who adopt the Jesuit or the ultramontane views argue within such circles as bring them inevitably to these conclusions. Now, let me explain for the listeners what the Jesuit and ultramontane view is. The Jesuit and the ultramontane, or the radical Roman Catholic, the traditionalist Roman Catholics, the very, very, very conservative Roman Catholic is that the Pope is the God of this world, King of kings and Lord of lords. And nothing is legitimate unless it passes his test. And that he has the divine right to rule the world, every man, woman, and child in it. Okay? That is the Jesuit and the ultramontane view. Now, this author shows that they are the only logical deductions from their mode of reasoning. Asking the question, how far do Catholic doctrines extend on the subject of resistance to the civil power by physical force? He proceeds at once to combat and deny the proposition that obedience is due to a government from the very fact of its existence. In other words, just because the government of the United States exists, and it has existed for over 200 years, does not make it a legitimate government, and that obedience that obedience is required because it is a government in fact. In other words, we can call a revolution at any time within our rights. Okay? He says this he calls unsound doctrine, which is contrary to right reason and has never been taught by Catholicity. And we've seen throughout this book that any time the papacy thinks it advantageous, he may overthrow a de facto government, a government in fact, a government that's in place, a government that's operating smoothly, a government that renders support of its people, and generally, even though it's a successful government, it is a government de facto. It is not a papal government. And when such time arises that it can be safely overthrown, that is what happens. Now it says, whenever according to him the Roman Catholic Church speaks of obedience, quote, to the powers that be, unquote, it has reference to, quote, powers that have legitimate existence, unquote. So, when the Roman Catholic Church speaks of obedience to the powers that be, that's their phraseology to describe the legitimate form of government, it is reference to the powers that have legitimate existence. Why? Because, says he, quote, the absurdity that a simple fact can create right can never become a dogma of Catholicity. In other words, a government can never proclaim to the world legitimacy just because it is in fact in power. In other words, the government of the United States, though it has a constitution and a whole nation of people subjected to its laws and fighting for foreign wars and conducting all the normal business of any nation in the world, though it, from all outward appearances, it appears to be legitimate, well-established, settled, with no internal strife, operating like a well-oiled machine like the United States does, it cannot be called a de jure government. And Roman Catholics can never be compelled to be satisfied with it. Now, that is, the papacy asserts the right to go behind the fact that a government exists and inquire whether it is or is not legitimate, whether, in other words, it is a de facto or de jure. And if it is found to be de facto merely, it may be resisted, because otherwise it would be the concession to an illegitimate government of, quote, a right to command, which would, unquote, which would be to legitimize usurpation. In other words, the Vatican can never accept as legitimate this form of government because it was derived from usurpation, revolution, of a legitimate de jure government, the kingly government of England. So it's doomed, and it can't redeem itself. According to the Roman Catholic view, according to the papal view, there's no way to redeem the nation, the government of this nation. And that overthrow is the only option. Now it says, therefore he argues, quote, that no reasonable man can seriously accept, unquote, such a doctrine as that, quote, of consummated facts, unquote, as applied to governments. Yet remembering what he had just said about not resisting existing governments, quote, from motives of prudence, unquote, he continues, quote, I do not deny that there are cases in which obedience, even to an illegitimate government, is recommended. When, for instance, we foresee that resistance would be useless, that it would only lead to new disorders and to a greater effusion of blood. But in recommending prudence to the people, let us not disguise it under false doctrines. Let us beware of calming the exasperation of misfortune by circulating errors submissive to all governments for all society, unquote. It is a favorite idea with all the supporters of the papacy, most persistently maintained, that whenever society gets from under the influence and control of the Roman Catholic Church, it necessarily runs, or automatically, and automatically runs into heresy, infidelity, anarchy, and all sorts of things. Look, the Roman Catholic Church teaches that it is the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, outside of which no salvation is even obtainable. That the Pope is the vicar and the replacement of the Son of God on earth, has all the attributes of God on earth, has all the power and prerogatives of God on earth, is the interpreter of the Scriptures and the lawgiver. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords, and there's simply no way for any other church to result in anything but anarchy and infidelity and heresy. So if this government or this people in the United States of America describes itself largely as Protestant, and the Constitution contains Protestant tenets that are directly in contradiction to Roman Catholic canon law, it can't be redeemed. It simply cannot be redeemed. It has to be destroyed. And it is to be described as heresy, infidelity, and anarchy. Though we have a civilized society, as many people would judge, and everything seems to be operating smoothly, there's no rebellion in the country, we are considered by the Roman Catholic Church as an anarchy, without law, simply because we're without canon law. We are a nation of laws instituted by the people, not the Pope. And it can't be tolerated in the world, according to the Papacy. It says they repudiate everything like middle or conservative ground and seem to be utterly unconscious of their intolerant and partisan excesses, as well as the fact that it is only the progressive influence of Protestantism which has lifted the nations out of the darkness and superstition into which they were sunk during the Middle Ages. In other words, never mind that America is the glowing example of success in the world. Never mind that that glowing success and wealth and affluence is a result of the Protestant Reformation. No matter how beautiful that city, the United States of America, is, it has to be destroyed. And the Protestantism that brought it into existence as well. Because they're all heresy, anarchy, infidelity. A government of, by, and for the people? Not in this kingdom. The papal kingdom. He says, we ought not to be surprised, therefore, at finding this recognized and authoritative propagator of Catholic doctrines falling into this error and talking about the subversion of all governments and of all society whenever they refuse obedience to the Pope and his hierarchy. That's what this is all about. The world is judged by the Pope. Every man, woman, and child is judged by the Pope. Every nation in the world is judged by the Pope in this. Does he obey the Pope? That's the way the papacy judges the world. And that's, given an opportunity, is what's going to happen in this country. He's judged this world to be heretical. He's judged the United States to be heretical. We'll be back right after these messages.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Inquisition Update is brought to you by FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you support Inquisition Update, please support FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And if you would like to contact me, you may do so by email. Email me at tom@seawaves.us. Also, check out the website inquisitionupdate.org. Now, before the break, we read this sentence. It says, "We ought not to be surprised, therefore, at finding this recognized and authoritative propagator of Catholic doctrines falling into this error and talking about the subversion of all governments and of all society whenever they refuse obedience to the Pope and his hierarchy." That's right, the papacy advocates the overthrow of every government that does not answer directly to the Pope. In everything we're reading, we have to come to only one conclusion. A revolution has been set up and prepared for this country ever since its founding. And that revolution will come from Roman Catholics, because the government of this country is called de facto by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in Rome. They have a moral imperative to overthrow the government. Now it says the standard he sets up recognizes only Roman Catholic governments and society. For from them alone does he suppose all human advancement and prosperity to spring. All else is evil, and that continually. Yet he prudently recommends that this evil, terrible as it is in the consequences to both this life and that which comes after, be endured wherever, quote, resistance and wherever resistance would be useless, unquote, because such resistance would be but, quote, the exasperation of misfortune, unquote. Still, however, this prudence must not be practiced at the expense of truth. It must be disguised under the false doctrines. But the true Catholic doctrine should be proclaimed, so that the power shall be preserved by the papacy to upturn and destroy all legitimate governments whenever resistance can be successfully resorted to, and establish legitimate governments in their places. So you can only take this to mean that the Roman Catholic Church is not only a fifth column for the overthrow of our government from within this nation, but every nation in which Roman Catholicism is practiced. Wherever there are Roman Catholics, there lies this imperative. If your government is not sanctioned by the papacy, it must be overthrown. You must tolerate this evil in which you live until the opportunity arises where there is a hope for success. So we've got a festering cancer in the country. Every country does. Every country that has a government of, by, and for the people is on borrowed time. The clock just keeps on ticking. The priests just keep on preaching. And the people just keep on being deluded that the Pope is the God of this world, and to be Christians, they have to obey him. And they have to overthrow their governments. And it says, thus was the real design of the publication of this book in Europe in 2 languages, a design manifestly sympathized with, if not openly avowed by its American publishers, when they profess to regard it as having, quote, supplied the age with a work which is peculiarly adapted to its wants, unquote. In other words, this book is extremely important. It addresses the wants of every nation. The answer to those wants and needs is that all de facto governments must be overthrown and replaced with de jure governments. Now, he finds no difficulty in arguing out of the way the scriptural teaching that the civil authority must be obeyed, this merely furnishing him a field for the display of Jesuit ingenuity. Illegitimate authority, says he, is no authority at all, because power involves the idea of right. And where no right exists, there is only force. Therefore, he argues, when the Scriptures describe obedience to the authorities, it is the lawful authorities that are implied. Again, the kind of civil power to which the Scriptures enjoin obedience upon us is that ordained by God himself, that which is the minister of God himself, which a usurper and illegitimate government can never be, and which none but a Roman Catholic government can be. You see how they twist the Scriptures? They take Christ off of his throne, and they put the Pope upon it. And again, the obedience to the civil power prescribed by the Scriptures is the same as that prescribed, quote, to the slave in relation to his master, unquote. It exists only where there is a legitimate dominion. If the slave is unjustly held in servitude, he may rebel against the authority of his master. But if justly held, he may not. So, if the civil authorities be not lawful, that is, ordained by God himself, as the Pope shall declare his law, no obedience to them is required except that, quote, which prudence would dictate, unquote, and they must therefore be endured as a misfortune until resistance can be made successful. just other words to describe what he has already described in so many different ways. The government of this country, according to the papacy and according to the Roman Catholic hierarchy in this country, is doomed. It is their duty to overthrow it. Now, whatever process of reasoning he adopts, he reaches always the same conclusion. He keeps always within his prescribed circle. But whether it be large or small, he never fails to terminate at the point most prominently before him and most indelibly fixed upon his mind: the illegitimacy of all governments not based upon the divine law, meaning, of course, the divine law as the infallible Pope shall declare it. Conscious of the opposition to these Catholic doctrines, of the practice of the early Christians, who always submitted to the ruling authority of the government without concerning themselves about the temporal power, he endeavors to point out the futility of their position by insisting upon a distinction between the state of things existing then and that existing in our day. In these early centuries, according to him, all that upright men could do was quietly to resign themselves to the calamitous circumstances of the times, and by fervent prayer to implore the Almighty to take compassion on mankind. But now, since the number of Christians has increased so that they have become a controlling power in the world, since they have, in many instances, overturned governments, and may do so again whenever circumstances make it prudent to attempt it, he admonishes the faithful adherents of the papal cause to husband their resources and submit prudently, for a while, to illegitimate rule, but in the meantime to prepare to strike when the proper hour shall arrive. And that proper hour is upon us here in the United States of America. The Roman Catholic Church, now after post-Vatican Council II and the ecumenical movement, the papacy can now walk into the Roman Catholic hierarchy can now walk into St. Peter's Square and say, now, we don't just represent 25% of the Americans of Americans. We represent an overwhelming majority, because now we can claim the Protestants on our side, the evangelicals, because they want peace and unity with the Roman Catholic Church. And they want to unite with us now in political activism to make this a Christian country. Because they believe now that to have a Catholic country is to have a Christian country. You see what they've done with Vatican Council II? Without their knowledge, they've just signed up all the evangelicals in the country as part of their entourage. And that day is fast approaching. The hour of the overthrow of our government is fast approaching, and it will be done under the guise that they're going to set the record straight once and for all. This is a Christian country. And never comprehending that it will be a Roman Catholic country and not Christian at all. And the very evangelicals that have assisted the papacy in gaining the upper hand in this country will then become the targets of the revolution. Do you comprehend what bodes for the United States of America as a result of Vatican Council II and ecumenism? R.W. Thompson's laid out there's no other option for the United States than the overthrow of this government. Roman Catholics in this country have enjoyed the Protestant liberties for so long, and yet, wittingly or unwittingly, they have supported the overthrow, and that support even came from Protestants and evangelicals. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is not bliss. And I hope, so long as God gives me breath, to correct that ignorance and to show the insidious nature of the Roman Catholic Church, the antichrist nature of the Roman Catholic Church, and the extreme damage that Vatican Council II and ecumenism has done to this country. and explain to the people who are now outcrying that their rights are being taken away, their liberties have been taken away, the protections of their personal beliefs, conscience, freedom of press, freedom of religion, posse comitatus, habeas corpus, all the Magna Carta of the United States of America has just been a line drawn through it. They've overturned our Constitution right before our very eyes. But nobody blames the papacy. Nobody blames the Roman Catholic Church. And R.W. Thompson is plainly telling us there's no power on this earth that could overthrow this government but the Roman Catholic Church. And it'll be done from within because they're going to lull the Protestants to sleep. They're going to forget their Protestant heritage. They're going to eventually unite with the Roman Catholic Church and hire their own inquisitor. And that's exactly what we've done in this country. Ignorance can't describe it. Apostasy can't describe it. Spiritual ineptitude cannot describe it. Scriptural illiteracy cannot describe it. It is a deception. It is a blindness that has come over this nation that cannot be comprehended. And to correct it, we need to once and for all comprehend who is the Antichrist. Is he yet future? Really? Is he yet future? Or has he been with us all along? And when you begin to realize that he's been with us all along, fulfilling his prophetic role in the world, just as it was written in the Scripture, killing God's people, persecuting God's people, rendering the cities waste upon the earth, soaking the earth with the blood of the prophets and the saints and all the slain of the earth, when we realize we've made an error in failing to understand and recognize who Antichrist is, then, only then, can we comprehend how apostate we are. And you see, the realization that the papacy is the Antichrist has its own built-in defense mechanism. Because if we won't accept and acknowledge the papacy as the biblical and historical Antichrist, we're not going to fight it. We're going to go along with it. And that's what America's doing. Ignorance is not bliss. Now, he cautions them first to be sure that the government at which they strike is illegitimate, a question which now, since the dogma of papal infallibility, belongs to the Pope alone to decide. So the order to overthrow the government is going to come from the papacy. And it says, then second, they should have in view the substitution of a lawful power, which, of course, the Pope also decides. And third, they, quote, should count besides on the probability of the success of their enterprise, unquote, a matter which involves prudential considerations alone. In other words, the Roman Catholic hierarchy in this country, particularly the Jesuits, in each of their provinces across this country, have their thumb placed upon the pulse of this nation and constantly trying to assess, when is it good to go? When is it good to go, this overthrow? Prudence, cost-benefit analysis. Can we succeed? How much will it cost us? How many Catholics will we lose in the struggle? Can we assess the possibility of success out of this, or should we wait another 10 years, another 20 years, another 30 years? Should we have another Vatican Council II? Should we foment a civil war in the country on matters other than religion? Because we can't launch a religious war in this country and tip off the Protestants. They're not yet fully asleep. It says, in the absence of these conditions, there would be no object accomplished. It would be a mere fruitless attempt, an impotent revenge. It would only cause bloodshed, only increase and irritate the power attacked, and have no other result than the increased oppression and tyranny. They call the government of the United States oppression and tyranny simply because it doesn't answer to the Pope. Cost-benefit analysis constantly being conducted by the Roman Catholic hierarchy in this country. How soon before the revolution? What should we do now to increase our chances of success when that day and hour should come when the Pope would say, "Go, now, go." He says an Archbishop of Palmyra had published a work upon the church militant, that is the Roman Catholic Church. She describes herself as the church militant. You suppose Jesus Christ would describe his church as the church militant? Yes, the Archbishop of Palmyra had published a work upon the church militant in which he maintained that when Christ commanded his followers to, quote, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, he meant, quote, that the mere fact of a government's existence is sufficient for enforcing the obedience of the people subject to it. That is, he established the doctrine of consummated facts. But this he calls a fallacy, and declares that this work of the Archbishop was forbidden at Rome by the sacred congregation, a decree, he says, in which every man who is jealous of his rights, that is, all the defenders of papal infallibility, will acquiesce. Keeping in mind his prudential argument, and suggesting that the interference of Christians in political disputes would only bring their holy religion into disrepute in the event that they should fail of success, he surmounts the difficulty arising out of the consummated facts by repeating his argument that they must be legally consummated before the obligation of obedience can arise out of them. And then by way of a practical application of these Catholic doctrines, he continues, quote, hence, in a political and social sense, we designate consummated facts as usurpation. That's right, the government of the United States, the de facto government of the United States, is a usurpation because it usurps the kingly authority, the Pope. It's a usurpation completely overthrowing the legitimate power, and by means of which the usurper is already substituted in its place. A measure executed in all its points. Such is the suppression of the regular clergy in Spain and the confiscation of their property to the treasury, a revolution which has been triumphant and which has entirely disposed of a country, as was the case with our American possessions, unquote. We're going to get to what he was referring to here as we continue. It says, this is the culmination of this distinguished author's theory of the Catholic doctrines of which he is able and eloquent, of which he is an able and eloquent expounder. It reaches the point to which everything is now pressed by the defenders of papal infallibility, that is, to the point of revolution. Recognizing no other form of government except the monarchical is consistent with the divine law, Pope Pius IX and his hierarchy do not hesitate to declare in the face of the world's progress that every other form of government is revolutionary and usurpation. Therefore, these Catholic doctrines are put forth by one of the most eloquent men in the Roman Catholic Church to show that all revolutionary governments are unlawful, and that although prudence may dictate obedience to them for a season, yet that, as they confer no right whatever, they may be destroyed and lawful governments erected in their places whenever it can be done without the infliction of too much harm upon the attacking party. And who would the attacking party be? The Roman Catholic Church. And therefore, in order that the prudential submission to a revolutionary government for the present may not be disguised under false doctrines, the teachings of this author are translated into English, published in the United States of America, and circulated among our Roman Catholic population, avowedly upon the ground that they are particularly adapted to the wants of the present age. The government of the United States had its origin in revolution. Our fathers cut with the sword the cord which had bound the American colonies to one of the monarchies of Europe. Believing their cause to be just, they appealed to God for the protection of His providence, and we believe that they won their success under that protection. They snatched liberty, civil and religious, from those princes of the old world order, who had managed to keep their feet upon the necks of all who desired to enjoy it, and this elevated the inhabitants of this country to a condition of prosperity and happiness which has no parallel in all the ages of the past. They build up a government which secures in a higher degree than any other government on the earth all the rights and immunities of citizenship. They recognize the common brotherhood of man and open their arms to the oppressed, the persecuted, and the downtrodden of the world, inviting them to come and share with them the blessings of free and popular institutions. Millions of them, who were the slaves of political and ecclesiastical tyranny in the countries of their birth, are now in this country and have already experienced the improvement of their condition, have acquired a new and more invigorating manhood. Of these there are thousands who love our government with fervent intensity, who have defended its honor and its flag when they have been attacked, and are ready to do so again to the very death if necessary. But the papacy would have them assist him in overthrowing this government and returning to the slavery, both civil and ecclesiastical slavery, of the old world order. Now you know what the new world order is. It's simply the old world order restored. I'll see you next week on Inquisition Update.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, the rapture will be canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.